So one of the key features of eukaryotes that we see is sexual reproduction. Okay, so archaeans, bacteria, they go through binary fission, making an exact copy of themselves, which can be problematic because you're not mixing genes, really, right? Just making an exact copy of yourself, your offspring are an exact copy of yourself. So if the parents are sensitive to something in the environment or can't survive in a specific environment, offspring have an equally likely chance of surviving or not surviving, right? So asexual reproduction, low levels of genetic diversity. Sexual reproduction, though, we're mixing genes, we're going to increase genetic diversity so that the offspring are not identical to the parents. And in the game of evolution, variation can be a huge deal, right? Variation means that you're more likely to survive in different environments if you have a wide variety of genes in your population. So we're going to hit on some terminology that we haven't covered yet in this class that we'll cover in 212 or 213, but just kind of a preview as to why sex is important and what's going on. Okay, so in eukaryotic organisms, we have 2 copies of each of our chromosomes. So most eukaryotic organisms are diploid. We have 2 copies of each of our chromosomes. And remember, this is what we're representing here. These pieces are linear pieces of DNA. Those are eukaryotic chromosomes. Remember, bacteria and archaeans, they have their circular chromosome, right? Each chromosome has thousands of genes on it, okay? And each gene is in a very specific location. And we get 1 copy of each chromosome from one parent and 1 copy of each chromosome from the other parent. And we call these chromosomes homologous because they contain the same type of information, but maybe different forms of that information, right? So like on these two chromosomes, let's say these are both chromosome number 2, for instance, right here at this spot, if this contains the gene for having, big ears maybe, ear shape, maybe in the exact same spot in the chromosome from the other parent, it still codes for ear shape, but might be a different form of that ear shape. Maybe this is pointy ears and this is big ears, right? So same type of information, but different forms of that information is going to come on each of the chromosomes that you inherit from each parent. So when a cell has 2 copies of each chromosome, we call it diploid. In most animals, most of their body chromosomes are diploid. And our gametes, spermatic cells, will be what we call haploid, meaning having only 1 copy of each chromosome. Okay. There are some organisms that kind of play with this idea. They'll have entire life stages where all their cells are haploid, which we'll see when we get to plants especially. And then they'll have entire other life stages where all their cells are diploid. Okay, so how does this come about though? How do we go from haploid to diploid and back to haploid? So that's the process of mitosis and meiosis, which we are not covering in this class, but we'll cover in the future term. Just a little preview here. That's a eukaryotic cell making an exact copy of itself. So mitosis is a type of reproduction where we're basically, in most multicellular eukaryotic organisms, we're replacing dead or damaged cells in mitosis. It can also be used for asexual reproduction if organisms are asexually reproducing, which some eukaryotes do, depending on environmental conditions, right? So in mitosis, 1 parent cell divides to make 2 identical copies of itself, which we call daughter cells. So if the parent cell is diploid, the daughter cells will be diploid. Meiosis is a little different. Meiosis is a type of cell division that we only find in cells that are diploid, that have at least 2 copies of each chromosome. And in meiosis, we're basically taking a diploid cell and making 4 haploid cells. So we make a copy of the entire DNA, and then 1 piece of each of that DNA goes into the 4 of those haploid cells. So meiosis is most commonly used to make things that we call gametes, sex cells, sperm and egg, that are used for reproduction. And in meiosis, there's a lot of DNA mixing, both between the chromosomes of the parent cell, and then these cells can recombine with other haploid cells, ideally from a different individual, to reproduce back to that diploid stage. So meiosis, we go from diploid to haploid. Mitosis, we make exact copies. But why meiosis? Seems like a kind of a weird thing to do, right? So meiosis is what forms gametes, these haploid gametes. Okay. Then, during the process of sexual reproduction, these haploid gametes will recombine to form a diploid organism, a diploid offspring. So now this new diploid offspring has genes in a combination that has never been seen before. So it's a genetically unique individual because it's getting half of its chromosomes from one parent, half of its chromosomes from the other parent, and producing a brand new diploid organism. That new diploid cell, that's a result of sperm and egg fusing, goes through mitosis to form a new diploid organism, which will then grow up to be an adult again and then reproduce. Okay? So meiosis is what allows for haploid cells to form. Those haploid cells are used for reproduction, sexual reproduction, which means we're going to mix up genes, increase the genetic diversity of the population, which means more raw material for natural selection to work with. So it's not always that simple of diploid to haploid, back to diploid. Many protists, as well as a lot of plants, have entire life stages that they're just hanging out as haploid. And this to me is one of the most confusing parts about the life cycle of protists and plants, is knowing which stage is haploid and how this all works. So we typically start life cycles when we're talking about eukaryotes at the diploid stage. Those diploid cells will go through meiosis to produce haploid cells. Remember, haploid means one copy of each chromosome. Diploid means two copies of each chromosome. Those haploid cells can go through mitosis to produce more haploid cells. So we can have, in plants too, we'll see this, entire life stages that are multicellular, where all the cells are haploid. And then some of those specialized haploid cells will produce those gametes, those reproductive cells, the sperm and egg, which can recombine to go back to the diploid stage and then go through this whole thing again. And this diploid stage goes through mitosis, meiosis, mitosis, mitosis, and back through again. Okay, I know there's a lot of terminology here, so terms that you may not have heard in a while or heard at all, that's okay. But we'll be seeing kind of this theme again as we talk about especially the life cycle of plants and fungi.